Okay, so it's a good afternoon and welcome to this session, Self-Service Business Intelligence Governance. My name is Peter Myers and I'm co-presenting with Siva from Microsoft. Quick introductions. Myself, a BI expert. I don't work for Microsoft, but I work out there in the field. So I have to present to you some theory together with real-world experience about how to implement managed business intelligence right through into self-service business intelligence.
And I'm Siva. I'm a program manager in the SQL Server Analysis Services team, and I've been in the team for about 11 years. And my PhD was also related to distributed data and how to analyze it. So in the same field, so I've been enjoying in the BI team.
And just as an acknowledgement, the presenter this afternoon was to be Kai. Unfortunately, he was not available to present. And so we've greatly leveraged his content, so there's a thank you to him. Also, we point out that he presented this at the North American event, and there's just a different perspective. He has a whole different world's experience. And so we'd strongly recommend that if this is a valuable session to you and you're looking to derive further value, the URL here to watch the North American recording of this will provide you same slides, but a different take and use of examples. All right, so our agenda is to talk about self-service business intelligence from a governance perspective. We'll take a look at what happens when you don't have governance and the steps and guidance to establish governance. We'll introduce the self-service BI reference architecture, and then we'll talk in detail progressively throughout this presentation about the difference of self-service and managed self-service business intelligence. So before we actually dig into self-service business intelligence, I guess we all know what business intelligence is: transforming data into knowledge to support the timely decision-making processes we have within the business. But the concept of self-service business intelligence takes it to a newer and more recent concept of enabling the business users themselves to create solutions. So did anyone attend my session, I think on Wednesday, which was the overview of Office BI? Not one. Hey, that can't be right. Raise your hands really tall. One. Okay, thank you. I feel a little bit better. Essentially, that was a topic that said, what could we do to empower business user? And it focused on two products in particular, Office and SharePoint. From Office, we had a look at Excel and the fact that there were numerous features included in Excel. So beyond the core spreadsheeting capabilities, you've got now the ability with Data Explorer to extract, transform data, the powerful concept with Power Pivot to create data models, embed multiple sources, logic, and create your own data source, and then, of course, building reports within the same workbook of this experience. This is what we see as the emergence over the past 3-4 years of self-service business intelligence capabilities in response to a need out there, and that need being that business users can't always rely on IT corporate systems to go ahead and answer the questions that they have. So as a classic example, I need to analyze per capita sales, and I go to the data warehouse, and of course I find that sales information is there, but I don't find any information about population. And of course, I need to divide one by the other. So what do you think happens if I walk on down to the IT department and I knock on the door of the data warehouse manager and say, I have a report that needs to be written by tomorrow for a meeting, and I need population data to be added to the data warehouse? What do you think the chances are that he's going to be responsive to that? Yeah, probably not very responsive. He certainly has other priorities, and the fact that this potential one-off ad hoc requirement is a priority for you doesn't necessarily mean it's a priority for him or her. So this is where the user's in a bit of a hard place. He doesn't have the data and IT is not going to support him. So the next thing is he uses the tools at his disposal. And before the emergence of truly dedicated self-service BI tools, we found very imaginative uses of Excel and Access and other such products, to the point that this created an indirect frustration to IT. All right, if IT couldn't help one way or another, if that person needs to get their job done, they're going to find a way to do it. And then we found the emergence of all sorts of, bad practices going on. That things weren't being reviewed or monitored or backed up or adequately secured. Okay, and so thus we see the emergence of this new discipline and interest from the IT perspective to maintain self-service business intelligence, with the understanding that we can't stop the business users doing this. We may as well, to mutual benefit, work together, and that's very much what the focus of this session is. Anything to add with that?
Yeah, one example would be like, let's assume that I'm the person in HR doing some analysis on competitive analysis in terms of salaries in the organization. IT said, no, we don't have the data of competitive analysis. I went and built some workbook comparing the data which is there on the web, and people start using it. Now I go on vacation, and I get stuck in vacation, then people are completely reliant on this report, and completely no one is able to do anything at all, and that creates frustration for a lot of the users who are depending on me, and I'm currently on vacation. They're going to be very unhappy. This person went on vacation, right? So this is a normal theme. It's not just in HR, but like it could be any of the department where one person is providing a service where IT is not unable to support it because they're constrained based on time. Then you run into these problems.
So this session really is about how you can help unleash the power with self-service BI and at the same time mitigate risk and maintain control and oversight. So let's take a look at what happens first of all. Self-service BI, unconstrained, without control or oversight. And I think you get a first impression from this diagram with relationships crisscrossing all over the place. The fact that we have different data stores, we do have a formalized data warehouse here, we have source systems. This poor information worker at the bottom, this is the guy that's been tasked with producing a sales per capita report, for example. And so the dilemma facing him or her is, well, where do I find that data? Well, do I have access to it? And then once they have access to it, what are they going to do with it? And so there's all sorts of challenges here, including the fact that the data may not be available to them, it may not be in a structure that makes sense to them. OLTP schemas seem to make much more sense to us as database professionals in their normalized fashion than they would to a business user that simply wants to find out sales and population. So we have a bit of a story to tell around this.
Sure.
And I'm promoting Siva to the position of analyst. And to make some demonstrations clear here, we'll be switching roles. Sometimes there's an IT role to demonstrate and talk about, sometimes it's the analyst. So over to the analyst. For those that are listening to this recording, we have Siva wearing the cap that labels him quite clearly the analyst. And the demonstration here is about self-service BI without boundaries.
Okay, so I am the analyst here. And so this is I'm analyzing some of the fact sales data with some products, and this is the overall schema. This is Power Pivot here. What you have is Power Pivot with various tables which have been integrated, some calculations that have been created, and in addition to that...
so what company are we working for here?
Think of it as a company which sells various products, and this is the sample data which is there, and it's part of the product, so which is AdventureWorks. So we're just looking at taking at some of the data in terms of and analyzing that data. And this has various products here, and a simple pivot table analyzing various products. What are the sales amount, profit count over the various years? And I am a big Pink Panthers enthusiast. Is anyone else who's interested in Pink Panthers? No one? One person? No? Okay. So I searched on the web, and I wanted to find out, I want to help the organization, how can we make more money in terms of some of the products, right? And I started analyzing, I run into this website, which gives a count of various cities and the count of Pink Panthers. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to see, okay, is there any correlation between Pink Panthers and any of the data that's going on here, right? And how can I help the organization? So here we have a tool called Data Explorer. How many of you heard of it? Data Explorer? Okay, so several of you have heard of it.
Half the audience.
So you can directly, in Data Explorer, you can go into the From Web, and you can type in the URL here. Just From Web, the URL, and can try to import the data here, and it comes up with a list of things which it understands. I'm going to traverse through that, and we have the table count with the list of cities and the count. It automatically analyzes the data. I'm going to change this here. Okay, Pink Panthers count. Let me land this here, and the data is getting pulled in from the website. and it's landed into Excel sheet here. And now I have this data. Now I want to be able to add this to the data model, which I have, to be able to analyze it. So here you have a button here, load to data model. So this helps you to immediately load this data into your data model. And this has loaded the data into the data model. Now let's go back to the data model here. And the data is loaded here into the model. And here you see the table is loaded with city name and count. Okay? Now, in order to integrate this data into the data model and analyze it, I need to establish a relationship. So in the diagram view, what I'm going to do is drag and drop city name so that this establishes the relationship. And I'm going to go and do one of the DAX functions here. I'm going to go into geography table, which has the geography information. I'm going to add a new calculated column called equal to related So this is getting the various values. It's already obtained the values here. And I'm going to rename this as Pink Panthers. Okay? And you don't have the data for all the cities. So essentially, you see the various values which are here. And you have blank values when you do not have the values. So if I just filter it, you can just see the cities which have the values. Now I want to be able to go ahead and correlate this data with the information I have. And I'm going to just create a pivot chart here. And let's move the pivot chart a little bit for the analysis. And I'm going to let's do the city name and the Pink Panthers. And I'm going to analyze. I've done a little bit analysis on this, so I'm just walking you through what I've done, and just with sales quantity here. Okay, so just put in the analysis between, say, Pink Panthers and the sales quantity. Now, in order to make this a little bit more, there's too much amount of data. I'm going to do a little bit of filtering here to slicing to add some information. Let's add the product category and the color name. And it brings up the 4 slices. Let's add this. Smooth these slices so that we can see. These are the various countries and states which are there. And now let's look at, I'm just looking at the data called cell phones here. And since these are Pink Panthers, are there any interesting things going on here in pink? Let's go, there's still too much amount of data. I'm going to go into United States. And let's pick one of the states here. I'm pick up Texas, which is one of the largest states. And I find very good correlation between the quantity of cell phones and Pink Panthers. So then I go into the assumption, okay, Pink Panthers are buying the pink cell phones. Now I have an excellent market opportunity to sell these cell phones, make them much more profit for the organization. And I'm very, very excited to go back to my manager, and say, okay, I've found this interesting data. We can go ahead and start selling this. Now, I want to be able to give what is the market capitalization opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and make some more changes in the model. I'm going to go to the model here, switch back to fact sales. I'm going to create a measure. I've created the measure here, and I'm going to say
and what is this measure going to do?
So I'm going to just walk you through the measure. So what this measure does is it's summing up the Pink Panthers, the count of the Pink Panthers, and then subtracting the overall quantity of cell phones that have been sold and the products sold, and then just dividing by the Pink Panthers. So this is just giving you an opportunity how much market capitalization I can reach depending on the quantity of the Pink Panthers which are there. And now I'm going to go ahead and analyze this. Another tool which is there, and so called Power View. Okay, so I'm inserting a Power View sheet, and I'm going to include the city name, and let's go into the market capital here. Okay, and you also have the visualization of the map visualization here. If you haven't seen, if it's geographical information, you can visualize this as a map. So I'm going to load this up as a map here, and this is quite a bit of data for me to analyze. So I'm going to apply some filters here. And let me go ahead and go into geography table. Country name, this is probably already there. I'm going to include the products here. Product category name, and then I'm going to include the color name here. And let's select the cell phones, and let's select pink here, and still quite a bit of data. And I'm going to switch into the map filter. So here this is the market capitalization, and this is the range. Let's say I'm going to do a little bit half of it, right? So now it automatically gives you a map visualization of what is the various cities and how much opportunity do I have, more than 50% of it. And if I go ahead and look at this, I can see what are the cities and what is the opportunity. Now, if I go and look at what is the biggest opportunity here, it's Oshkosh in Wisconsin. Now this is something interesting data I found out. I go ahead and publish this to my manager, and my team is also excited. They go and start looking at this. They play around with the data. They draw interesting conclusions. They're also thrilled. We have a lot of opportunity to get a lot of sales and profit out of this.
So what is this really telling us? The larger the circle is telling us...
Larger the capitalization overall.
Okay, so there's potential Pink Panthers out there that could still want to buy
the cell phones.
Pink cell phones. Okay. So are we interested to know what the audience think of this analysis?
Yes.
Is there any observations that you've made about this? The analyst has gone together and integrated two sources of data together. He's made some assumptions. He's drawn some conclusions.
I'm looking for a good bonus as well as part of this.
Does he deserve the good bonus? Okay, so the feedback is that the quality of the data sources has not been reviewed or approved by anybody. So we've had a self-service BI analyst here just help himself to data out there on the internet. Are we really sure that the Pink Panther counts are audited and reviewed? So there's that concern, the quality of the data that's an input. Let's not forget garbage in, garbage out.
Yes. We have another person?
Do we trust SIVO is coming out? That's a good point. Look at this man's face. Okay, so the
do we trust
data...
the calculation? Do we trust SIVO overall?
So let me just repeat that back for people who didn't hear it. So the concern is that all the knowledge, the expertise that was put into this, maybe even the location where it's stored, is known to perhaps one individual. And should he leave, hit by a bus or whatever happens, all that knowledge has gone. IT didn't know about it. And then we might have management screaming about this fabulous report we used to have, but where is it? Are there any other concerns? I'm concerned that it took you so long to actually raise your hand.
Are you going to share these with more than one person? It's going to start sending emails back and forth and adjustments and multiple which is the latest one.
Okay, so the concern here is version control is that as it gets revised according to feedback and new features or fixes, are we going to keep track of those versions? Or are we going to be confused and lost and have version hell? That's the concern.
Okay, we have one.
There's been no domain expert has been consulted on the
We haven't used a domain expert in Pink Panthers?
in
In Pink Panthers?
big yeah, no, about the selling phones.
Right.
Selling phone.
On Big Panther, you've got an expert, but on selling phones, so there is a one-to-one relationship for every member of Pink Panthers. Again, that buys a cell phone is
All right.
going to buy a Pink Panther phone.
I'm very happy that you've brought that up. So could you just repeat that one more time?
Yes, there is not a one-to-one relationship. Just because you've sold 100,000 cell phones in Oshkosh with constant doesn't mean at 2M there's 100,000 whatever relationship of Pink Panthers.
Right. So what's being said here is a huge assumption's been made that just because we sell pink cell phones and there are Pink Panthers in those locations.
They are going all to buy one, at least one phone.
Right. So I think a certain assumption has been made here. That the assumption is that pink cell phones have been bought by Pink Panthers. And therefore, the subtraction of one to the other to come up with this market capitalization is flawed, isn't it? Can you draw that conclusion? I don't think you can. It makes sense, and I think most of you probably look at this and go, that sounds about right. And if someone put this report in front of you, you'd go, oh, okay, fine. In Marseille and in Oshkosh, we should be boosting our efforts to start identifying and locating Pink Panthers and marketing to them. So I'm very, very glad that came out, because that's really the major concern here is we've got someone that potentially doesn't have the domain knowledge that you raised, has produced a solution that could just be accepted on face value, and decisions and actions are going to be made on top of this.
Okay.
All right, thank you. That's well done. So do we talk about the story of sharing and...
Yes. So why don't you want to get into the...
Well, I think your job's are sharing.
Okay.
So because we've empowered this business analyst to wreak havoc on the business by providing him access to SharePoint.
Yes. So I've gone ahead and I've actually published this onto Power Pivot for SharePoint in the Power Pivot gallery. And
because the manager is so interested in this, the manager said, let's share this with everyone in the team and other people within the company. This could address the version issue.
right. And here, if you go to here, you can actually go and interact with this. You can find out what the values are. This is essentially the Power Pivot workbook shared onto the SharePoint site. And this is being talked about overall in the company. And then IT gets to know about this. And they want to be able to go ahead and say, we want to be able to make this into the entire organization. This is being leveraged so much. It's pink cell phone, market of capital opportunity. And they want to be able to do this. Now, how do they go about doing this? So they want to be able to import this for the entire organization. And what we have is...
no, this is my job.
Yes.
Sorry, analyst.
We have
You're overstepping your boundaries. So some things to note there. Having published that workbook to SharePoint, we've addressed the version issue. We've addressed also the knowledge issue that should Siva, for whatever reason, not turn up for work anymore, this document in the form of an Excel workbook that contains an embedded data model, business logic and data, has been secured and is being backed up as part of the SharePoint content databases. And so we've solved some of the problems, but I don't think we've addressed the flawed logic at this point. And so at this stage, I step
I'm going to give in.
Because as an IT professional, and I switched my hat on, we notice heavy activity going on. And we'll talk about the management dashboard with Power Pivot later on. But we've been able to identify that there's been heavy usage and heavy querying of this data model. And that interests us because we think that a system that's being heavily used is potentially mission critical, or perhaps needs some review that may have been overlooked. And so we take a look at the workbook by doing this. We could say, look, you could keep it in SharePoint. That's not going to scale particularly well. We would like to take it on board as a corporate project. And we have the ability then of launching up our Pro Tools. Here I have a solution named Corporate IT. I can then introduce into it a new project. From the analysis services templates, there's one called Import from Power Pivot. And I could just create this by saying this is now, Pink Panther analysis. Browse to the location of the workbook. Now I just go to the content database, but it's easy for me here just to go to our solution file. And we'll ignore that error for now. But what it would do is pretty much read the definition of the model, create an analysis services tabular project, which stage me as a corporate IT person could review, could actually look at the calculations, maybe implement new calculations that were beyond the expertise of the business analyst. And at that point, when I'm actually happy that it meets business requirements, I could check it into source control, I could deploy it to a server, and that I can ensure that it was frequently processed. And that's just giving us an idea about the handoff from a personal BI solution to a team through SharePoint to ultimately to a corporate BI solution managed and sanctioned by the IT department. And we'll be covering that story end to end in our presentation now.
The file was open, so that's why.
Oh, was it? Thanks for
Yes.
that. So that's where the demonstration ended anyway. The tabular database, we had a session on that, so we're not going to go there any further. Are there any questions with how we've set the scene? So, to have self-service BI or not to have self-service BI? I mean, if you look at both extremes, and sometimes I think of it this way, that if you don't have it, you're creating a whole different problem. You're not allowing the organization to be agile, you're not allowing users or business users or decision makers to truly do the best that they can. If you let it run rampant without control, without regulation, you have a completely different problem. So in my thinking, when you think of the two extremes as the ends of a spectrum, there's got to be a right place somewhere in between. And from my experience, what I've discovered is that it's not the same for every company. Every company is going to have different requirements, and so for that reason, this session is about guidance. It's not about prescriptive steps that you need to take, but it's about guidance and about things that you need to think about and potentially take on board to meet the requirements that you have back at your own organization. So, self-service BI, not to discourage you, can be risky.
We'll walk through certain milestones, which are more of recommended practices, but you need to be aware of what your organization needs and come up with your exact governance requirements.
Right. So here we've got unapproved data sources. That Pink Panther site has not been sanctioned by IT. Bad formula. So, I mean, it looks right, but the logic that was used to analyze market potential for Pink Panthers was totally flawed. Thanks again for that. And insecure devices and storage locations. So at first this was stored just on the desktop. What would happen if his laptop was lost, the hard drive crashes and so on. Finally, proliferation of unmanaged business critical solutions. IT doesn't even have a clue that this is being run and that decisions are being made from it. Do you want to talk about the success side?
So in terms of success, essentially, we discussed a little bit about in terms of IT being constrained in terms of time and picking up the various projects. So the key thing is self-service BI can be successful, make it, leverage it, and it can be a useful tool for your organization so that you are making the information workers independent, they can analyze the data and they can share it. And the key thing is to incorporate in your organization in an effective manner so that you can have appropriate data governance. We're not walking through each of them, but we have a lot of it is incorporated into the existing familiar tools in terms of Excel, making it Power Pivot, and integrating with SharePoint, which is the collaborative environment by which you can share all your documents, which you're already doing it. So why not incorporate? That's why we've stacked up all the Microsoft BI tools together to make sure your organization can succeed. And we're providing the right tools appropriately. Then it's up to you to leverage them appropriately to make sure your organization is successful.
Okay, so what are the points here? Fast and dynamic access to reports and analysis where and when you need it. So this agility. When decisions come up, we need to have the resources and the tools available to go ahead and answer questions. What else? High adoption rate across organizational function and business units. Familiar tools, hello Excel. An IT department in the role of business enabler rather than a dependency, which is the traditional approach. And I need something, I'll go to IT to get it, rather than IT being there to support me remember there's this thing about mutual benefit, that it's going to be in the interests of both groups to support this and to maintain adequate self-service BI support. So, clarify roles and responsibilities. It must be clear in the organisation who has the authority to make decisions and how initiatives are evaluated and funded and is accountable and responsibilities. So when we look at the diagram here, starting from the top down, it's absolutely crucial that this is defined and managed and enforced from the top down. If you don't have that from executive management, it's not going to trickle down adequately. So at the very top level, executive management, we'd hope and look towards vision and leadership. And that if there ever were any conflicts or issues that needed to be resolved, we could always have the support and the decisions, or rather the enforcement from top down. BI governance, so it's good to have steering committees and working groups, and as large as possible, include all parties that have a role to play within self-service BI. And it's here that you will formulate principles, policies, standards and procedures. These should be documented. SharePoint's a great place to store them. New employees should be directed to read and understand how the workflows and decisions would be made, and what boundaries are set for the different roles. And then finally, at the user base, awareness and execution. These are the guys that will implement self-service BI in conjunction with the support with IT.
And as part of it, I just want to give, I might be sharing some customer examples whom we have been working with as part of it. Related to this, I just wanted to share one example. It doesn't have to be from top down. If you are a business analyst working on it, that one of the organizations where the business analyst was using our products, and in order to be able to make sure that this particular workbook which is done, it's evangelized, it's owned by IT and managed later on, he had to go up the chain and evangelize it appropriately, going up to the management chain. It doesn't have to be always from top down. You as a person, you are responsible for not only for your role, for your organization's success. So you need to make sure you are evangelizing what you're doing and the right policies are being handled, right? So in this particular case, this was the employee who took it up on himself. I'll be on vacation. I don't want the organization to suffer. I go through the ranks in terms of making sure this is being made well aware of, and it's being used and leveraged by everyone.
Okay, so in essence, formalize self-service BI. Win the decision makers. So clarify BI content ownerships, principles, processes, policies, priorities, and goals across both business and IT. So establishing control and oversight. Did you have something to say about this slide, or was this me?
This is you.
This is me? Okay, great. So taking a look here on the left-hand side, we talk about whether it's ad hoc, it may be just a one-off requirement, like I've got the need to analyze sales per capita, or is it short-lived, that it's the duration of a month, a project, or is it something that's going to be controlled and managed for a longer life cycle? So the diagram here builds from the bottom up, so it could be that you're working with local resources, file shares, personal BI on the desktop, the ability then to publish and share at a project level, so working with teams, with collaboration sites that will introduce SharePoint in a later topic. Getting up to the enterprise data warehouse and the dashboards and scorecards is a more formalized approach. So what I find typically is that you're getting into the corporate level at this point. However, you do have the specific individual power users that start to tread in this territory. So my experience has been that you want to make friends with these individuals that are both tasked through their job responsibilities, but also passionate and curious enough. These are typically the folk that you're not aware of until one day you come across some example of this amazingly elaborate workbook that they've created, and that consists of amazing logic and macros and so on. That when you find these people, you want to embrace them and you want to empower them, because they will allow you to delegate back, and they'll also be points of contact for other people in the business to learn and to be managed by.
So I did want to add one more.
Then please do.
Yes. So I was visiting one of the customers last year, about a year and a half ago. I can't name the customer, of course. And they had a very, very strict control and oversight on, especially on Excel workbooks. And they did not want people, the information workers, to go ahead and share it on network shares. So they were constantly monitoring networks and looking for Excel workbook files and deleting them. Right, so they had written automation to make sure this is not the norm to be. They wanted tighter control for the organization, for the benefit of the organization. So they had specific jobs written to go and scan every single network share and ensure that the workbooks are there. If it's being shared, delete them. So.
Wow, just delete the workbooks. I've come across organizations that ban access, but Excel was not quite it.
Again, it depends on what is your organization, what's the policy, and you're following the policy in your organization.
So win the users. Use familiar BI tools and develop an ongoing training plan for tools and processes. So important to the business users that you're looking to empower is access to tools, access to training. Don't underestimate that one. And also access to appropriate data. So when the three come together, then you've got the powerful mix. So what do we see here? Mapping users to tools and training needs. So from a point of view of the Microsoft product stack, I thought this is I didn't build these slides, Kai did, but it's interesting to sort of see for the first time the strata of the different user groups that you might have, from information worker at the bottom, people that just consume data, to the business analyst that may be involved in more ad hoc, those one-off now and then, sales per capita is the example, the decision makers that then become consumers but also set the requirements. Power users, as I just introduced, are a different class in that the fact that they may even have the initiative to discover and create entire solutions that they see fit needs. And then there's, of course, us, the BI pros, the professionals that are housed in the IT department. So what you see there on the right-hand side is the move from ad hoc to permanent, and then the producers of intelligence that you normally sit within IT or very closely related to it also have the concept of ad hoc and permanent. Different tool sets, though. We'll see that for the consumers of intelligence, Excel is where Microsoft's focus has been, and this is growing over time. I think Data Explorer and GeoFlow, which you may well have become acquainted with here at this conference, are just further examples of how this basic spreadsheeting tool has developed and is being extended with more and more capabilities specifically to support business analysis.
So one thing to just add, highlight the point, how we, from the product team, how we see this is primarily, this works? Yes. So the top end of the pyramid is the producers, and then the bottom end is the consumers, where what we call as the producers are the people who are leveraging the tools and building the reports. So there are two parts of it. One is the BI pros. These are the people whom we see as building using SQL Server data tools, building the model and sharing it and managing it. And then you have the power users. We see these as the people who are building the Power Pivot reports and leveraging Power Pivot, Power View, and Excel pivot table and building the reports. And both these people will be sharing reports for the entire organization. And the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid are the people who are using these, right? So you can think of it as like the key decision makers for the organization, CEOs or the group managers. They are the people who are viewing the reports. The business analysts are also leveraging this, as well as the information workers and the team who are looking at the data and analyzing it. Okay?
Look for partners. So self-service BI governance is not the only governance effort in your enterprise. We would expect that there would be data governance, there would be business intelligence governance. So you may well find that self-service BI governance is really an extension of both or perhaps one of them. So the importance of governance initiatives did you have something to say about this slide? From corporate, right up the top, we've got self-service BI as the apex, addressing and guiding policies, principles, and decision-making. But it's not an island to itself is the point. It's the fact that you've probably already got other governance processes and controls in place, and it may well be just the extension of these.
Yeah, so just to add, you already have certain set of governances in terms of emails, what is the size of the email attachments and everything. As an example, you already have certain policies in place in your organization. As part of it, in terms of data governance, and then leading up to self-service BI governance, approach it in that particular manner. This is an extension or addition to whatever governance you have, and expand this to self-service BI so that you can also enable the information workers and data analysts who are building the reports in terms of the power users, and then leveraging it.
Building the data infrastructure. So users must be able to use approved data sources and data feeds. So this is a good opportunity for a demo. So I'm going to switch my corporate IT hat on. Actually, no, I'm not. I'll start with the analyst. Let's start with the problem. So I'm an analyst that needs to get information about employees at my favorite company, AdventureWorks. And so with the training and the tools they've been provided and the data access, they can come across and connect to a SQL Server instance. And I'll specify the AdventureWorks 2012 database. And then I start scratching my head, because when I look at the available resources to me, I know it's something to do with human resources, so I can locate whatever owner means for an object. And I find that I've got all of this type of information here in tables. It's not a convenient way for me to get to the data. An OLTP schema is there optimized for write-intensive operations. It's not really optimized for non-IT professionals to help themselves to. You need to know what objects. You need to know how to relate them through joins. You then need to know how to define calculations. Not expecting our business users to do this. And so this is where the IT department should come in, with the understanding of this requirement. And maybe the cooperation between the departments means there is a channel whereby the request can be made. We need to go ahead and create a report about employees. Could you help support us with this? So the IT group could go ahead and do something like this. And this is what's interesting about AdventureWorks, and partly frustrating. It is truly so normalized that to bring back a simple list of employees with attributes like name and job title, email address and gender and so on, it really does join together about 8 tables. And so let's abstract the business analysts from this. Let's give them a helping hand and a fighting chance. And by executing this, I can then instruct the user to go back. So I switch hats. And this time, they can gain access through the view. I mean, it sounds like simple, fundamental stuff, but I just don't see it being done enough. I see the business analyst there, even if they make the request, it doesn't quite happen in the way they want it. And there we go. Bring in the table. This creates a data connection file, finish, and the table gets added to my Excel workbook. We could take it steps further. So what I want to demonstrate here is inside, and this is as the IT professional, inside my corporate IT solution, I have a reporting services project. So with the recognition, by using tools like Report Builder, that they might want to create more presentable reports that uses images, may need to be rendered as a PDF, and Excel isn't going to do this. So inside the project, this is fairly standard stuff for anyone that knows reporting services, is that we can create objects that represent connections. And this very much abstracts anyone from having to understand network locations, authentication, and so on. So there is a data source created. And we can take that a level further by also creating data sets. So a data set being a command or an object to retrieve data. It retrieves and exposes a collection of fields. I can then come in here and say, well, this becomes the employee list. Using the AdventureWorks 2012 connection, I can then come into the query designer, and it may well be that I don't create that view. I just go ahead and take the query logic, and this becomes the definition of the data set. There's the result, tests well, and there is the collection of fields that would be available through this data set. So my next step would then be go ahead and deploy the entire project. The properties for this project have been configured to deploy to my SharePoint environment, and you can see here that a data source and a data set have been deployed. So switching across to the analyst now. They've been told that there are pre-published resources available to them. Navigating across to the SharePoint site, locating in here in the data connections library, there is the connection. IT would have secured this, so only the right people had permission to it, and from here we could go ahead and launch experiences to create reports and so on. Located in my report data sets is the employee list. So the way that would work with a business analyst is that they would come to reports library and they could create a new report builder report. No need for them to understand how to connect, and they're trusting that they're connecting to resources that IT have approved. So with a blank report here, you can introduce a data source that is based on a shared resource, and there it is. Or, because I need to create a report about employees, I just add a data set, and then I browse for the shared data set. And the rest is just a layout and representation of that data. While we're in the report, another great feature that was introduced in SQL Server 2008 R2 is that you can support users by creating components. So when you publish reports, you can actually publish individual items from the report, be them parameters, images, tablexes, charts. And so you could support them in this way that you could say, well, not only do we give you the data set, but maybe you could also be given things like, and I come to the insert here, report parts, browse on the server, and I find that the sanctioned logo is available. So rather than having to fish around looking for where is that logo and maybe inconsistently using different logos. So the approach here would be, Pink Panther's probably not the best choice, but your company logo should never be embedded into reports. What IT would do is store an image on a web server probably, create a report part that is based on that image, and that is then used consistently through the education and policies we have. We say when you create a report, if our logo needs to be on there, browse to this location and introduce, as I just did with Pink Panther, the logo. If the logo ever needs to change in the future, IT are happy to know that they just need to change that image file, and that all reports will, because they've been based off the same report part, provide consistent logos through the report. Now, the other thing that IT can do is create libraries of data feeds. Why do we have data feeds? What are the benefits of data feeds?
Anyone in the audience?
You don't know when new data is becoming relevant or relevant data to your users.
Okay. So I think what it really comes down to is that OData feeds are particularly good for unknown subscribers. We're not sure how it's going to be consumed, and we're using web standards and XML to communicate data. And so the example that I have for you here is that when we educate people on to use Power Pivot within the organization, the concern we've got is that there could be inconsistency in the way that they're defining key entities like time and date. And so what I like to think is that as part of the support and as a crucial part to a data model design is that you need a date table. And that date table needs to be rich, full of attributes like year, quarter, month, and accounting period, and so on. We shouldn't expect that all the Power Pivot users need to go ahead and reinvent the wheel and create that date table every time. So I strongly suggest to my customers that we go ahead and we create a data feed like this. In fact, it's a data service. It's hosted on our web server, and I'll cancel that. If I go and edit this, you'll see that this data service document points to the service on the web server, and what we're able to do then is to introduce a collection of feeds. There's a date feed, there's a time feed, because this data service has multiple feeds coming from it. So then the education's very simple. Now I switch across to the analyst hat when I need to go ahead and create a new Power Pivot workbook. And I'll use this workbook here, open up the Power Pivot window. I would have some basic steps that would have been in the company policy to say that when you create a data model, when you're defining a date table, go ahead and from data service, from OData feed, you will browse across to your SharePoint site. You'll find inside that site that there'll be a data feeds library eventually. And inside that data feeds library, you will find the data service document. Click open. When you click next, you'll find that the defined feeds are available, and then it's just a matter of selecting the feeds that you want and the columns from those feeds. And that's how IT can ensure that quality data stores are being used and available, and The other concept is that, as databases might move across systems, is that all you need to do is update a central location. That data service document gets updated and everything continues to work. And that's the demonstration on working with data sources.
So just to summarize what Peter was mentioning, IT is providing the service of approved data sources. That's one of the ways of governance in terms of they exactly know all the users are using the approved data sources, right? And from the user's perspective, they are leveraging all these data sources. I don't have to go and verify. This is already pre-approved by IT. I trust the data, I trust the connection, and the entire organization is depending on the right data. So it makes it easier. So this is one step of the data governance, overall self-service BI governance. Okay. So moving into the next. So this is consistent with the theme of the pyramids. This is how we see in terms of, on the left-hand side, you see the various providers. On the right-hand side, you see the various ways in terms where data can be shared. Right? From the bottom of the pyramid, you see various flat files, text files, etc., which are available in terms of the desktop databases like Access. The next level going up is the web data in terms of OData feeds, content from the web. And then moving higher up is the relational databases. Then you have the multidimensional and tabular databases using analysis services and Power Pivot. And then at the top of the pyramid here, you have the parallel data warehouse, large volume of data, right? So this is, you can think of it as these are small volume of data, but a lot more of the files. While going to the top, you get smaller and smaller, but huge volume of data, right? So you can think of it as like this is all the overall data infrastructure, depending on what you're using in your organization. Find out how you can expose these data in a consistent manner so that all your users in the organization can use the approved data sources from the connection libraries, which are available on the SharePoint side. Okay. Thank you. From the connection libraries for each of them so that people are using in a consistent manner. Okay. Next topic is more in terms of how do you enable seamless and secure collaboration. Okay. So aligned with the same theme, you have the pyramid here. So on the lowermost end, you have the files and on the local devices, and then going up to the network shares, going up to SharePoint shares where the documents are getting published, and then you have email in terms of you can configure your Exchange server and crawling and making sure any of the documents you search on the email, which is related to the organization, that can be shared and made available. And then the last one is how are people sharing their information on the cloud, this is on Office 365 or on SkyDrive, right? So I wanted to mention one of the customer stories in terms of related to this. So one of the customers I've been working with, I'm currently working with, so they are looking at self-service BI. So they have several users building their overall. Hello. So they have there are several users building their own reports in terms of self-service BI. And their IT department, they're looking at it as I have an enterprise organization model, tabular model, and all these users are building a lot of Power Pivot models. Now, how do I go about and incorporate this into the overall system? So they look at actually activity. You will see a little bit later in the demo, Power Pivot management dashboard. So they look at what are the various Power Pivot workbooks that are getting used heavily. And I want to be able to see the data sources which the users are pulling in. From these Power Pivot data sources, are these approved data sources, and are these already in the organization in the tabular model? Now, how can I enrich my tabular model overall so that I can benefit all of the users, right? So they were discussing in terms of how do you automate this whole process. I gave several suggestions. I can stay offline and share some of the experiences. They're looking at it as how can I look at into each of the Power Pivot workbook, what are the columns that are getting pulled in, what are the data sources, and I want to look at it, extend my official tabular model on the overall organization, expand it out so that all the users can benefit from it and point to this single version. That's how they are embracing the overall self-service BI with appropriate governance. So this is one of the customers I'm working with, so thought it will be useful if you want to take advantage of that. Okay. So the next one is identify products and integration points. Okay. So this is overall in terms of self-service BI. You have a lot of moving components in terms of the components from the overall Microsoft stack, from SharePoint, SQL Server, and everything. So it's a very, very complex one. And then what we have done is we've broken down in terms of a reference architecture. Okay? So in the top of this, you have various client tools from Power View, Power Pivot, Excel. All these are consuming data, right? And we split it up into 2 different stacks. So this is the line which has been drawn. One is the corporate BI and data governance. This is all, you can think of it as coming from overall from IT, right? You have various relational data sources and the various types of data sources, from relational to BI semantic models to data feeds and everything. And then the next stage is, this is the data tier, what we are calling as a data tier for your reference architecture. And then next one, we are calling it as information. You can think of it as like model information. This includes the overall in terms of analysis services, reporting services, master data services, integration services. All these come into the picture. This is all governed by and owned by IT in terms of overall architecture. Then you have the presentation layer, which is more in terms of everything related in terms of integrated into the overall SharePoint environment. And this plays a critical role for self-service BI, right? Everything is more in terms of collaboration with self-service business intelligence. And that is where you need to look into what is the self-service BI governance, what is right for you. So we just provided a reference architecture. This is how we look at it in terms of the overall various tiers of the reference architecture. Now you can look into how do you leverage this architecture and make it available and make it suitable for your organization needs. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hand it over.
Okay, so that really introduces big time the concept of SharePoint. So it's a document management system. It's going to provide the benefits of storage, of version management, and workflows that we'll talk about in a moment. SharePoint becomes much more interesting from a BI perspective when you consider the service applications that you can work with. So listed here in, I'm not sure why, the priority of 1, 2, and 3. Native Excel calculation services features, number 1. So Excel being the tool of choice for most analysts, simply because of its familiarity and its richness of capabilities, means that when we produce solutions here, consisting of data models, reports, and other logic, we can then publish them to SharePoint libraries. We can secure them there. And when we publish, you have the option through browser options, I think it is, what worksheets or items should be published and whether parameterization would be supported. This allows the Excel calculation service to know what can be loaded and rendered. So this is the first step in allowing you to control the data that's made available through the service itself. When a request is made to Excel services, a document is loaded from the content library. If there are any data connections, they will be refreshed to ensure that up-to-date data is available, and then it will only render what has been supported to be rendered. Now, what's cool about Excel services is that this is a way of controlling how data is made available and also potentially how data can leave the environment. You see on the right-hand side the table, the bottom right corner, and the permission sets that you can apply to libraries and documents and other resources, is that if you allow a user to have read access only to the workbook, then they can view it in the browser. They can't actually download the workbook itself, because the damage that could be done there is that they could actually look at the data model, they could look at the data, they could look at the business logic, they could also look at things like connection strings that you might want to obscure for them. If they do have read permission, they can download the workbook in a snapshot form. What they see in the browser window can be made available to them, but nothing more than that. And so there's a great way of controlling the fact that you've got data and intellectual property that must remain secured, and you can do that via SharePoint. Number 2, install analysis services in SharePoint mode and register the server in Excel services, and this will enable the core Power Pivot functionality. So if you publish a workbook that has a Power Pivot data model embedded into it, that is really a deployment story. Upon the first request for that workbook and a request to refresh the data. So an example could be a pivot table that is based on the Power Pivot data model. Then that will engage the system service to essentially take that data model and to restore it to analysis services that forms part of the SharePoint farm. So there's a deployment that is happening in a self-service BI scenario simply by publishing a workbook. The workbook itself, via the URL, can then be used to connect to that data model. And so other users, whether it's a self-service BI story, whether it's just an ad hoc request to query the Pink Panther sales, we can connect via the URL in Excel on the client, and then we can form a pivot table as if it were a remote analysis services data model, because it is. It's no different to a tabular model or even a cube that is being deployed to an instance of analysis services. Number 3, Power View, made available to us with SQL Server 2012 and SharePoint 2010, and now available with Excel 2013. But the story here being a SharePoint environment that when you install the reporting services add-in in SharePoint, this enables the fact that Power Pivot reports can be created via the browser based on tabular data models. So the self-service BI story continues here in that you can create the workbook, the data model on the client, publish it and secure it inside SharePoint. You can also configure refresh to ensure that the data is maintained and current, and then you can build interactive and presentation-ready reports on it. So there's a full spectrum. And I think if we even take a step back now with Data Explorer, you have even the data preparation tool available to you. I've heard it's described as an ETL tool for business analysts, and I'm not quite sure that's the way we should be thinking of it. But it does allow you to do sophisticated transformations, so I can see in part it's like an ETL tool. Okay, so that's establishing a self-service BI environment. What we haven't discussed there is that you also have reporting services, and Report Builder was part of the past demonstration. Performance Point Services is in there for a richer category of BI. I sometimes argue that this shouldn't be self-service BI, but it sort of fits into it, and Microsoft's intention clearly by the choice of application, which is Dashboard Designer, a click-once deployed Windows application. It's targeting the business users, not the IT pros. The reason I'm a little cautious with performance management is it's a discipline in its own right, and defining key performance indicators that drive change and behavior in an organization, you want to be absolutely careful that you approve and review what is being published here. Visio Services is the other. If you're in my session on Tuesday, you can see how to bring data diagrams to life by connecting data and expressing it through text, shapes, colors, and icons. Workflow is another benefit of SharePoint. So workflow could be from the simple to the more advanced. The basic workflow could be approval processes that are built into libraries. So this would be ideal for data connections, for example. You might allow the business users to publish new data connections. Why would they do this? Well, if you publish a Power Pivot workbook to SharePoint, you might want others to easily use it and easily launch report writing experiences. You can create Office data connection files that connect to it. You can publish them. You can then ask your manager, should they need to analyze the Pink Panther sales, that they can just go to the data connections library, click on the ODC file, and that will download the ODC file to the client. That's an Office data connection file. It will launch Excel, and it will create a pivot table that connects to your Power Pivot workbook. So there may well be a story for allowing, in this case, Siva to create an ODC file in the data connection library. However, with a workflow that means it must go through an approval process, it's not publicly available until someone's actually inspected that. And so IT could then come in here, look at the ODC file, and of course the data model behind it. Once they're satisfied it's something that they would sanction, they would then approve that document, and then my manager would have access to launch their own experience. Now, that's a simple example of a workflow, just approval processes, but workflow could go from simple to advanced. Developers could be involved in producing workflows that could adequately address the requirements you have in your own organization. Do you have anything to add about that one?
Now, the one thing would be, another option would be to even have SharePoint lists and expose that as an OData service. That might also be another way. If you have various things in the organization, you can go through an approval process and specifically adding them as SharePoint lists in the organization, and that can be exposed as a data feed that can be leveraged by all the users as well.
So this slide talks about managed self-service BI, and specifically with our point 4 here about the Power Pivot story. And it's interesting to note, and in fact I'll quiz you guys, do you know what the project code name for Power Pivot was? Released with SQL Server 2008 R2. Gemini. Okay, so the zodiac sign Gemini was actually a very good choice, I think, for this project, because Gemini representing the twins. there are two add-ins for Power Pivot. There's the add-in that was in those days downloaded and installed for Excel 2010, and that enabled Power Pivot data modeling inside Excel. The second add-in is for SharePoint. So we've already talked about the SharePoint capabilities of this deployment story, that when you publish a workbook, it's the SharePoint Power Pivot add-in that is doing the deployment by restoring your data model to analysis services. I talked also about the data refresh capabilities that a self-service BI user, such as Siva here, could configure. The other side to it is, from a managed self-service BI perspective, is that it delivers oversight to the IT group, is that via usage information that is captured and made available, interestingly enough. So the logged information is stored in a SQL Server database. That's all part of the prerequisites when you install the add-in. And this data is surfaced through a Power Pivot data model in a workbook that is published to the central admin site. From this Power Pivot workbook, this is what you call dog fooding in a sense, isn't it? Microsoft used their own technology to pass it on, is that there are a series of visualizations that allow IT through a dashboard to go ahead and understand usage, server resources, data refresh failures, and utilization of the different Power Pivot workbooks. And so let's take a look at this in demonstration. I won't go into the architecture now. We will just show you in demonstration how it all comes together. So what I'll do is I'll open up Central Admin, and then down here I've got a link to the Power Pivot Management Dashboard. This will be available. This is your first evidence that the Power Pivot add-in has been installed. Now, the problem I've got is that in a demo environment like my virtual machine here, I don't have a lot of history. I think we had published one workbook. I'm not sure if we even interacted with it, but I think if we refresh, we don't really get to see much. So,
did any of you attend the tabular BI semantic model session? Okay.
Someone did. What was the relevance of that?
I walked through this entirely in terms of Power Pivot Management Dashboard initially
as an
IT
so
pro.
There is another session for those that are here or those that are listening to this online. There is another session titled...
On Wednesday morning, I presented a session on tabular BI semantic model, how to manage it effectively. As part of it, the initial demo was about this.
Okay, so here I am as a corporate IT wanting to understand what's going on with Power Pivot inside my environment. Here's one report. Query response time. So it tells me, how long a user's waiting. So of course, as we start to see the statistics move from trivial, quick to expected, down to long or exceeded, and there are configurations as an administrator you can do to set the thresholds here, then you might be a little more concerned. You might find that, wow, the Power Pivot activity is much more than we ever envisaged. Either let's constrain that or let's put some more resources out there to support the activity. The next one is a favorite of mine. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Two different PowerPoint presentations running. Is the workbook activity chart. So what you'll see here in this scatter chart is that each bubble represents a Power Pivot workbook. On the vertical axis, we have the number of users that are connecting to it. On the horizontal, it's the thousands of queries. And the cool thing about this is that the IT pro can come in here and then animate this across time and then track usage and size of workbooks. Sorry, bubble size represents the size of the actual document. Okay, so of interest here, we might be taking a look at this. The tooltip tells us the number of users, the size. We can click it, and then we can see over time what's going on. And likewise with this one. So what do you think would happen if you discovered that one workbook in particular is growing larger and larger and larger? Well, the size wouldn't mean actually widely adopted. The coordinates would mean that. But the size would mean, okay, it's being refreshed and it's growing because of the accumulation of data. So you'd want to be aware of one thing here is that the document size cannot exceed 2 gigabytes in SharePoint. That's the limit of a document. So if you discover that it was growing and maybe approaching that size, that would be a time that IT would say, look, we're going to take that workbook, import it into a tabular project, and then we'll deploy it to analysis services. And then we don't have the constraints of the 2 gigabyte size. Now, the coordinates Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, so by default, Excel, when you install SharePoint, the file size limit, I believe, is 10 megabytes. So you would need to go and explicitly request if the file size needs to grow in terms of significantly larger number. So if from IT perspective, if they've set this up to 2 gigabytes, then they can easily monitor which are the workbooks which are actually growing, and I want to be able to look at it and find out what is the need, how many users are using it, and then how much I can incorporate in the organization.
Right. So of particular interest too then is if it's being heavily used, and this is how they can identify it. Think about this. Before this type of monitoring, you had no concept about how these solutions were ever being used. So in terms of number of users, in terms of the number of queries, at some point IT are going to say, well, clearly, if there's that much activity surrounding that workbook, this is something that we should know about and probably manage. And there's where we see the handoff from Team BI across to Corporate BI, and the supported path for this is the ability either to restore that workbook direct to analysis services. Don't recommend this. Would prefer to bring it into a project, check it into source control, do a thorough review, and then go ahead and publish that in the standard way that you'd manage the life cycle of a data model. There is also a report for the activity list. So in a tabular form here, you can sort. In this case, we've sorted in descending order of the number of users, but also in terms of number of queries, also the size of the workbook. I don't include an example of it here, but data refresh failures would be the other concern for you. If for whatever reason a workbook can't refresh, maybe that web page that we're accessing is no longer available, you'd want to make sure that's addressed, because users might be making current decisions based on past data and unaware of the fact that that model has been failing to be kept up to date. That's the demo on exploring the Power Pivot Management Dashboard. Where things are heading to at the next level, we don't go into it in detail in this session, but the ability now through a new add-in in Excel in 2013 called Inquire. So Inquire allows you within the workbook itself to interrogate the structure of the workbook, dependencies between cells, worksheets, even between workbooks. And also the ability for it to surface information of possible problems like inconsistencies in formulas and so on. Whether they're errors or whether it's malicious intent, Inquire can help you understand via this tool what the content of the workbook looks like. So this is going to be good for IT if they're ever reviewing workbooks. There is a server-side ability to review workbooks and have them audited, and that is the Audit and Control Management Server. And that's about as far as we take that topic. From an awareness point of view, we want you to take that away. So pretty much the story that we've covered here is the ability to empower individuals through tools, education, and access to data, and support from IT to produce their own solutions. This is usually to the benefit of the company because it provides agile decision-making processes. It also offloads the burden from you in the IT group to have those that know their data and know their requirements fulfill their own requirements. We've then seen how you can share this through SharePoint, so Team BI, and a great story with Excel, with Power Pivot, publishing that workbook and related reports, securing them, configuring automatic data refresh, and allowing a larger audience to consume and subscribe to your data. And at the same time, corporate IT can monitor and maintain those solutions. And then finally, the story if, and with Power Pivot, should it need to be promoted to become a corporate data model, there is the path for that. I should mention there's no path backwards. We don't take corporate data models and make them Power Pivot workbooks. Brings us to the summary. Siva, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah. So overall, in terms of you do need some kind of a BI governance, especially for self-service. A lot of the embrace overall self-service, that would be the recommendation. And we have the right tools for you to make sure you can monitor what the information workers are doing, overall monitor what are the workbooks, and leverage overall SharePoint so that they can publish it. All the other users in your organization can use it, monitor it, and have appropriate data governance in terms of specifying what are the list and approved data sources, and how do the users get to it, so that they use the approved data sources most of the time. And you have ability to monitor what are the list of data sources they are using, what are the workbooks that are being used heavily, or what are the size of the workbooks, and you have the ability to control and make sure that becomes an enterprise model. And you do need to understand what your organization needs are, set up the right milestones, make sure the entire organization, from the information workers to the top end of the overall executive decision makers, have the right awareness and make the right policies which suit your organization needs. Okay, that's primarily what we've summarized in the deck at a highlight. And do you want to include any?
Okay, so
risks?
there's a couple of slides on the summary, so we won't go through them. I think we have addressed them all in turn and with due respect. But of course, these PowerPoint slides are available for download. We encourage you to. There were some detailed slides that are worthy of review and for assistance in guiding you in defining your policies and procedures for implementing self-service BI. Are there any questions before we wrap up?
We have a book to give.
Yeah, we do. So while, just before Siva introduces that, we really do appreciate feedback. It helps us understand whether we've met your requirements and how we could better meet requirements in the future. In order to complete the evaluations, we make it easy for you. You just simply use this QR code to navigate to the evaluation site. So please take the time and effort to do that. It's valuable to us.
And this is one of the books which I've co-authored. This is about SQL Server 2012 analysis services. If there are specific questions, feel free to ask. We are here to answer the questions as well.
Is this bribery?
No,
No.
This is not bribery. Any questions?
I think we may have answered all questions.
Okay.
All right, so
I'm probably going to give it to him. He's been responding
yeah, actually,
a lot.
I think.
Oh, exceed.
All right. Look, let's take this opportunity to say
Yes.
thank you very much for
Thank
your
you
time
very
and
much.
attendance. We really do hope that this has been help in guiding you down your self-service BI path. And thank you very much.
Yes.